A window box, a balcony, a roof terrace. In the heart of the city, today we all want our own little patch of greenery. So what's new in terms of these havens of chlorophyll? How should they be laid out from the smallest to the biggest spaces? Here are some tips from our gardening specialists, and we'll start with two dream terraces. Camille Müller lets us into the secrets of one of his creations.
This roof terrace is very open, which makes it very special, and it already had some nice elements. These dark brick walls that I liked, and a great view of the modern buildings of Paris business district. For the choice of materials, I went for wood for the most part. But for budgetary reasons, I decided not to cover the entire patio with wood. And in the end, that was a good thing, because it breaks up the space and gives a slightly zen feel to the ensemble. The wood seems almost suspended in space. Then, the other material that is really important here is zinc. Another thing to think about with a terrace is a way to hide the earth and the containers, to keep things a little bit magic. This is a technique that I use quite often. I hide the box under a bench. The most important thing, I think, to keep plants happy is an automatic watering system. So you should always install automatic watering. Things always end in disaster when there's no automatic watering system. So that's the first thing to do. The second important thing is not to go overboard on the weight. So at the very most, limit yourself to 250 kilograms per square meter. That means working with lightweight materials and lightweight containers. The zinc containers that you see here are a good example. And you can also use peat rather than your average garden soil because it has a low density. So don't overload the terrace and install an automatic watering system. For me, the most beautiful terraces are the ones that give off good vibes. So you need to take what the space offers naturally and emphasize it, make it even more beautiful.
Another open-air example in a different vein and some more advice, this time from the Maison Sabs.
We wanted this terrace to be quite, well, to be like a sort of wild meadow, basically. That was the basic idea, to give the impression of a grassland prairie. A wild meadow on top of a roof. We tried not to mix up the plants too much. We worked more with clusters of plants. So there are lots of grasses, lots of different types of grasses. There are a few cypress trees that give a structure to the terrace. And then these clusters of lavender, and also a few succulents. Obviously, this terrace is quite high up and unsheltered, as you can see, which means it gets a lot of wind and a lot of sun. So we chose plants that could cope with these conditions. We had to find plants that would be tough enough to survive on this type of terrace. There is also this galvanized steel structure which covers part of the terrace, which was a good place to put a few climbing plants. We went for modern furniture in bright colors and shapes that make a change from what we are used to seeing outdoors. For me, what is interesting is to experiment with the surrounding environment. Here the environment is quite harsh, extremely urban. We're really in the city, so in this case, this grassy roof terrace softens the harsh side of the city.
In other words, what's important is to keep in mind the environment of the terrace and what we want to bring to it.
In fact, I said to Denis and Emmanuel that I wanted a Mediterranean-style terrace. Since being on the roof, it gets really hot up here in summer. So we needed to find really resistant plants. Now when I'm up here, I feel like I'm in the countryside. I can hear the birds singing. It's great.
If you're wondering what you can do with your balcony, you could always ask Pierre-Alexandre Risser, who has just created a service on the internet. You send him photos of the space you want to transform, and he will come up with a solution.
We work by photo. In other words, people send us a photo of the space they want to change, and we draw the plan for a new design on a piece of tracing paper over it. For each project, we offer our experience and ideas. as well as how to go about achieving the design and details of material suppliers, which means that the person can create their garden themselves if they like our ideas. More and more people want a beautiful garden, but either they don't have the time to look after it, or they don't necessarily know how to look after it, or they just want something nice without having to spend a fortune. That's why we also propose gardens using materials such as crushed slate tiles or concrete, brick, gravel, because these gardens need a lot less maintenance.
But since a lot of his work is in Paris, Pierre-Alexandre Risser now knows a thing or two about designing in small spaces.
Here we're on a balcony right in the center of Paris in the 7th arrondissement. Before, on this balcony, there was nothing at all. There was just bare ground and the railing. The specific design constraints depend on how the clients will use the balcony. So it's important to know whether they want to have a table and chairs to eat outside from time to time, whether they want low chairs, whether they have children, whether they have pets. We take all these criteria into account. What they want the balcony to represent, whether they want it to be an extension of their living space, or whether they just want to look out on it from their apartment. Or if they don't want to eat outside on the balcony because that's just not their thing. So we have to take all that into consideration to design a balcony that suits them.
And after that, anything's possible.
So here's the balcony. It's surrounded by this trellis. The trellis is perfect for a climbing plant such as this starry jasmine. Alongside the jasmine here, we've also planted a climbing rose bush. And here we have a plant called Doricnium. Then there are these olive trees planted here in the biggest pots, and on either side there are average-sized pots with a box-ball tree on the left. At the foot of the olive tree we have this climbing rosemary. The variety is called Orléans, which is a rosemary plant that flowers several times a year. And here we have the patio dining area. This part of the balcony is for dining outdoors, breakfast, lunch or dinner, whatever. Obviously, since this balcony is south-facing, the architect designed a pergola made of iron or galvanized steel, and we filled out the spaces by planting blue flowering and white flowering wisteria. We chose these plants because they're deciduous, so in winter they lose their foliage, which allows the light through and maximizes the light inside the apartment.
If you haven't got green fingers, then you may be better off concentrating on the furniture. It's a bit complicated, but we're gonna help you out.
What I'm really pleased to be able to show you here is this particular chair. Because here, actually, we are looking at the purest example of the classic garden furniture with this metal and glossed wood chair, and what's more, in this color. It's the ultimate outdoor chair, or pavement cafe chair, and still produced and made using the same simple process that has allowed the company to last for almost a century. Afterwards, based on this chair, there have been various developments. For example, the metal chair. So this time entirely made of metal, but with exactly the same construction principle. And here we have a beautiful creation, which is a step back in time. It was made in the 20s. It's called a Castile chair. This chair is called Louvre. And this is Montmartre, which also exists in a 1900s version. As you can see, the curves are a little bit more intricately worked. And this is the star of the show at the moment, the Luxembourg, low armchair and footrest, which has been reworked yet again in recent years. This is the authentic model, but we called in a designer to adapt the ergonomics. But in any case, this here is the original model that dates back, if I remember rightly, to around the 40s.
Another style at Cèdre Rouge.
These days, the layout of balconies and patios is becoming increasingly important because more and more designers are beginning to take an interest in this extra space. It has become an extension of the home and consequently of interior design. So obviously the space also becomes a canvas for designers to work on. For example, we are seeing more and more balconies with a birdhouse feature, because, believe it or not, there are actually a lot of birds in Paris. And a lot of people like watching birds, and children especially like the idea of having a birdhouse. Then there is a range of products that make it easier to move plants around. The balcony and gardening tools also sell well these days. It just goes to show that Parisians really appreciate having a bit of garden to tend to. Perhaps more so than certain people living in the country, simply because they are frustrated by the lack of nature around them.